So when I started preparing for my IELTS, and this was when I went from 4.5 to 6.5, I would say that I essentially prepared in two different stages. Use the 80-20 rule. I think that's probably one of the most common mistakes that I did. Now, let's take a look at a sample from an IELTS listening practice test. Hello and welcome to another IELTS video. This is Brahim here, and today we're going to be focusing on IELTS listening. When I took IELTS for the very first time, listening was actually my weakest skill because I only scored 4.5 in that section. However, after following a certain strategy, I managed to go to 6.5 just in a few months. Now bear in mind this was literally 10 years ago, so ever since I've improved significantly. So in today's video, I decided to share with you the strategy that I used in preparing for my IELTS that I really hope that can benefit you as well. So in this video, we will go through how to prepare for your IELTS listening. I will also share with you some useful tips and tricks that could make your preparation more efficient. And then I will actually share with you on how you can improve your listening skills in general, not just for IELTS. So without further ado, let's get right into it. So first things first, it is quite important to understand the structure of the IELTS listening test. Essentially, the test itself is about half an hour long. You will have 4 different parts that will progressively increase in the level of difficulty as you move on. In each part there are 10 different questions, so overall you have 40 different questions. And the number of correct answers that you're gonna get will determine the band that you're gonna score. So I highly advise you to understand the format of the IELTS listening test in more details. You can actually find several videos on the internet that comprehensively cover the structure of the test, the type of questions that could come up, as well as the most common topics that you could encounter. Please go and take a look at that. There are several different videos on YouTube. Those videos are pretty good, so I'm not going to be covering that in this video. So now I'm going to jump right into the preparation method. I'll be focusing on the strategy or the roadmap to get to that high band. So without wasting any more time, let's get started. So when I started preparing for my IELTS, and this was when I went from 4.5 to 6.5, I would say that I essentially prepared in 2 different stages. If we start with stage 1, I followed 3 different steps. So in the first step, I would bring a practice test, and then I will try to answer it to the best of my ability without looking at the script or looking at any answers. So I tried to get all the answers from the first time. However, it was very difficult, so I would also still allow myself to listen to it twice. And then after I have listened to it twice and have all my answers down, then I will try to move on to the second step. It's very important that you start there. No script at first. Also, don't look right at the answers. It's very important. In the second step, I would bring the script in front of me and at the same time check my answers with the correct ones. So those that I got correct are absolutely fine, but those that I couldn't even fill out or that I got wrong, I'll bring the script, play the audio at the same time, and then I'll be following the script and listening to the audio and checking that with the right answer, see how it makes sense. So if I got it wrong, it's either because that was a new word that I haven't seen before, some new type of vocabulary, so I write it down, make sure that I learn it, or if it was a word that I was not familiar with the way that it's pronounced, then I will learn how it's pronounced. Or it might have been because they were speaking too fast or they had quite a difficult accent. So as I am following along the script and listening at the same time, I'll still be practicing. So that's the second step. Now after having done that, I will get all the right answers. I will also, as I mentioned, write down the new words that I haven't seen before and make sure that I learn them properly. And then I will move on to the third step. Now in the third step, I will again remove the script and then listen to the audio and try to match it with what I've seen. So I'll try to concentrate and make sure that I fully understand what is going on. It's more like a wrap-up session, but it was also very important because if you have the script in front of you and you are listening to the audio, sometimes you focus more on the script. So it was always important to add this third step where I train to actually match what I have in mind with what I am listening. So in a nutshell, these are the 3 steps that I followed while preparing. Now, after having done that multiple times, and then also when my test is getting close, then I moved on to the second stage of my IELTS listening preparation. Now, the second stage is not that different, but I would say the main difference there, which is also very, very important, is that you practice with only listening once. And that is very important. Because if you get used to listening twice, you're always going to be kind of like a bit lazy or like waiting for the second time to listen to it. I think that's probably one of the most common mistakes that I did in my first, when I scored 4.5, and I think also so many different people preparing this way, which I don't believe is efficient. So in the second stage, when the test is getting close, I try to practice as if I were literally in the IELTS test itself. You only get to listen to it once, so that's what I do. I listen to it once and I try so hard to concentrate and answer those questions as if your life depends on it. Try to do it as if you were literally in the exam, the real exam. Get practicing with that and get used to it. Now I'm going to share with you some smart tips that could make your preparation more efficient. If we start with the first one, I would say use the 80-20 rule. If you're not familiar with it, this principle essentially says that 80% of the outcomes come from 20% of the causes. So if you want to prepare in a smart, efficient way, if you only focus on 20% of the causes, you can control 80% of the outcomes or the results. Now, when we put this into the context of language learning in general, there are so many different ways how you can apply it. But one way that I would recommend is that if you try, or if you focus on learning, let's say your English skills are not that strong or your English vocabulary is not that strong. So what I would say that you could use, try to first learn the 20% most common English words that will enable you to understand 80% of the conversations. Overall, I don't really know off the top of my head how many words in the English language there are, but I would say if you could learn 20% of the most common words, you will definitely understand 80% of the conversations. So what you can do is simply Google what are the 100 most common words used in spoken English, and you will find a list. So learn that, and then once you learn the most common 100, you move to the most common 200 words used in the spoken language, and then you move to the most common 300 words used in the spoken language. If you can't find list on the internet, you can simply use AI or ChatGPT. Those are language models, so I'm pretty sure they can give you some pretty good results. And try basically move on and try to cover as much as you can. In the context of the IELTS listening, if you want to take it another step further or you want to prepare in a smart way, as I mentioned, once you understand what are the most common topics that could come up, so if I remember correctly, those cover social situations, education, work, travel and tourism, health and wellness, technology and science, transportation, environment, and so on. I am pretty sure you can find different sources that will tell you what are the most common topics. But what you can do is, you can, in a similar fashion or in a similar way, you can literally find what are the most common 100 words used in education and work, like related to this topic. Or what are the most common 100 English words used in the context of the environment. So you get those words, you learn them, you learn the way how they are pronounced, you familiarize yourself with them, then that could benefit you, not just actually in listening, but that could improve your English skills in general. So personally, I think this is a more efficient way in trying to prepare, especially if you don't have enough time, rather than bring in some texts that are only related to some specific niche, and then you try and learn or understand every single word in that niche, which you will probably not see very often. So that is my advice to you. Try to prepare in a smart way, in a more efficient way. And that is basically one way to do it. Alright, now if you move to the second tip, I would say focus on learning synonyms and opposites. Because most of the time, especially in the IELTS listening, when you listen to the audio and when you look at the question that is written on the question sheet, they will usually word the question with different synonyms, or like they will use an opposite. So they will word it differently, and that's what you should be aware of. So in the audio, you might hear a certain word, but on the question sheet, there is its synonym. So it's quite important to have a wide range of vocabulary that would enable you to understand those. So in the same way, just go to the internet, find the most common synonyms/opposites and try and learn those. The ones that you know, that is fine. The ones that you don't know, look them up, see what they mean. Familiarize yourself with the way that they are pronounced. It's important to listen to the audio because that's how you're going to encounter them in the IELTS listening. And write them down, make sure that you learn those, and that's it. I would also advise you to focus on learning paraphrasing, or familiarize yourself with paraphrasing, which is saying the same thing or the same message but in a different way, like using different vocabulary or saying it in an opposite way. You can find actually some English games, fun games that you can practice with your friend, where you're trying to paraphrase or say things in a different way without using those, like some specific words. You can work on that, and you can find some games on the internet, so I'll leave that to you on how you can improve it. Now if I move to the third tip, which can be applied during the IELTS listening test itself, I would say before the audio start, try to read through the questions and try to understand as much as you can, and prepare your mind on what is exactly, like when you see the blank, prepare on what you're going to expect there. Is it a color? Is it a word? Is it a verb? And basically be attentive to what you're going to hear, to waiting for that specific word that will enable you to answer the question. Also, between the 4 parts of the test, you're going to have, I think, half a minute to check your answers, they will say. But that time is best used if you actually move on and try and start reading on what's next to come. Because after you've already written down your answers, there's no more audio, so you can't really check. It's not like reading where the text is there in front of you, so you can actually reconfirm. What I'm also gonna add is that when you are listening to the audio and waiting to pick the right answer, especially if you have multiple choices that you have to choose from, if you hear something or one of the choices, it doesn't necessarily mean that is the right answer, because that is actually one of the most common mistakes. People are focusing on the audio. Once they hear one of the options that is given to them, they're like, oh, this is the right answer, and then they will stop paying much attention, and then you mess up there. So that is one tip that I learned the hard way because I got 4.5 as I mentioned. However, the IELTS listening is very, very, very tricky. They will, most of the time, they will literally say the 3 different options, and you will have to figure it out on what is actually the right answer. So pay close attention. Sometimes you will have 3 different options, and then you will hear the person there's mentioning that they might go with the first option, and then the other person will say, no, this is not available, you can't go with it. And then they will mention the second option, and then for some reason he will say, oh, for the second option, I am not available. And then they will go, okay, let's go to the third option. So if you hear one of those options that's given to you, it doesn't necessarily mean it's the right answer. You need to really, really focus. Sometimes it's not explicit. You kind of have to work it out from some relation there. I know it's very tricky, but that's what I really advise you. So these are some of the few tips that I used myself. In my video, I'm simply sharing my method. So I'm only giving you here the roadmap, or I'm sharing the tools that enable you to actually get to that high band. I am not gonna be comprehensively covering every single example because there is already a lot of material on the internet. You can find more comprehensive videos on the internet from reliable sources which comprehensively cover all the different type of questions and also the way how that you can answer those.